Chosen one, pay attention to the silence. God is narrowing your circle because distractions steal devotion. Some relationships aren't sinful, they are just misaligned. And if a connection requires you to shrink just to maintain it, it is not from God. Heaven is not taking from you randomly. It is removing noise so you can hear clearly. And lately, you've been feeling it. Conversations that used to feel easy now feel forced. Interactions that once felt natural now carry a subtle weight, like something is slightly off but you can't fully explain it. You find yourself pulling back, not out of rejection, but out of discomfort you can't ignore anymore. And that creates confusion, because nothing bad necessarily happened. No clear conflict, no obvious reason to walk away. From the outside, everything still looks normal. But internally, something has shifted. And the hardest part is this: you start questioning yourself, wondering if you're overthinking, if you're being too distant, if maybe you're the one changing too much. But what if this isn't disconnection? What if it's refinement? Because not every relationship is meant to grow with you. Some are only meant to exist at a certain version of you. And when you outgrow that version, something has to change. At first, you don't notice it clearly. It's not like something suddenly breaks. It's more subtle than that. A shift in how you feel when you're around certain people. Conversations that leave you more drained than before. Moments where you realize you're no longer fully present. You're managing your energy, choosing your words carefully, holding parts of yourself back without even thinking about it. And that's where the weight begins. Because connection is not supposed to feel like constant adjustment. It's not supposed to feel like you have to shrink just to keep things smooth. But when a relationship becomes misaligned, that's exactly what starts happening. You begin to filter yourself, not out of wisdom, but out of survival. You say less, you explain less, you avoid certain topics, not because they're wrong, but because you know they won't be received. And over time, that creates distance. Not always externally, but internally. You're there, but not fully. You're present, but not open. And the confusing part is you still care. That's what makes this difficult. Because these are not necessarily toxic relationships. These are people you've known, people you've shared history with, people who were once aligned with who you were. There's loyalty there. There are memories there. There's a sense of connection that doesn't just disappear overnight. So when things start to feel heavy, your first instinct is not to step away. It's to try to fix it. You adjust. You try to reconnect. You question yourself. You wonder if maybe you're expecting too much, or changing too quickly, or becoming harder to relate to. But the more you try to force the old dynamic to work, the more unnatural it feels. Because the issue isn't effort. It's alignment. And alignment is not something you can recreate just by trying harder. When two people are growing in different directions, the connection doesn't necessarily break. It just stops flowing. What once felt easy now requires effort. What once felt natural now feels structured. And that structure becomes exhausting over time. You start noticing things you didn't notice before. Conversations that revolve around things you've outgrown. Patterns that no longer resonate. Values that no longer match the direction you're moving in. And again, nothing is wrong. It's just no longer right. That's a difficult space to sit in. Because there's no clear reason to leave, but there's also no real sense of staying. So you exist in between, trying to honor the past, while feeling pulled towards something different. And that tension creates emotional weight. Not because the relationship is bad, but because it's no longer aligned with who you're becoming. And the longer you ignore that misalignment, the heavier it feels. Because deep down you can feel it. Something has shifted, and it's not going back to what it was. There is a truth that becomes clearer the more you grow, but it's not always easy to accept. Not everything is meant to go with you, and that includes people. Not because they are bad, not because they've done something wrong, and not because the connection was fake. It's because every relationship is connected to a version of you, and as that version changes, the relationship either evolves with you or it quietly reaches its limit. Most people struggle at this point because they've been conditioned to see distance as failure. If something changes, it must be broken. If a relationship fades, something must have gone wrong. So when you begin to feel that subtle disconnection, your first instinct is to hold on tighter. You try to fix what feels off, to recreate what used to work, to maintain the dynamic that once felt natural. But growth doesn't always preserve what was. It often reveals what no longer fits. Because what supported you in one season may not support you in the next. What once felt aligned may now feel restrictive, even if nothing about the other person has changed. And that's the part that creates confusion. There is no clear conflict, no obvious reason to step back, no moment you can point to and say, "This is where it ended." Instead, there is just a growing awareness that something is no longer flowing the same way. And that awareness is not random. It's a form of filtering, quiet, gradual, and often misunderstood. You begin to feel less engaged in conversations that once felt meaningful. You notice that you're holding parts of yourself back, not intentionally, but naturally. You sense that if you were fully yourself, the connection might not hold the same way. And so, without realizing it, you begin to adjust. You become more selective with what you say, more cautious with how you show up, more aware of what is and isn't received. That's when the weight appears. Because connection is no longer effortless, it becomes managed. And over time, that management becomes exhausting. Not because the relationship is toxic, but because it's no longer aligned. And that's an important distinction. Misalignment doesn't always look like conflict. Sometimes it looks like subtle distance, reduced depth, or a quiet sense that you're no longer growing in the same direction. This is where your perspective has to shift. Because what feels like loss is often protection. If every relationship stayed the same, you would stay the same. If every connection continued unchanged, there would be no room for expansion. So instead, as you grow, your environment begins to adjust with you. Some people naturally evolve alongside you, while others remain connected to a version of you that you've already outgrown. And neither is wrong. It's just different. The difficulty is that you can still care about someone deeply and recognize that the connection is no longer right for where you're going. That creates tension because you're not leaving out of pain, you're stepping back out of clarity. You're not reacting, you're recognizing. And recognition requires maturity. It requires you to let go without resentment, to create space without assigning blame, to accept that alignment is not permanent, it is seasonal. Some people are meant to walk with you for a chapter, not the entire story. And holding on to them beyond that chapter doesn't preserve the relationship, it distorts it. Because the longer you stay in misalignment, the more you begin to compromise yourself. You start shrinking parts of who you are to maintain connection. You silence growth to avoid discomfort. You remain in spaces that feel familiar, but no longer support who you're becoming. And that comes at a cost. So this phase is not removing people randomly. It is refining your environment intentionally. It is creating space for relationships that align with your direction, not just your history. And while that process can feel quiet, even lonely at times, it is precise. Nothing is being taken from you without reason. What is leaving is making room for what can actually grow with you. And once you see it that way, it stops feeling like something is being lost, and starts feeling like something is being aligned. One of the hardest things to accept is this. Sometimes what feels like loss is actually protection. Because when relationships begin to shift or fade, your first instinct is to question it. You wonder why things are changing, why the connection feels different, why something that once worked no longer does. And if there's no clear conflict, no obvious reason, it can feel even more confusing. It can feel unnecessary, unfair even. But what you don't always see is what would have happened if nothing changed. Because misalignment doesn't always show itself immediately. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it grows quietly over time. And if you stay in it long enough, it doesn't just affect your relationships, it starts to affect your identity. You begin adjusting in small ways. You speak differently. You think differently. You hold back parts of yourself that no longer fit the environment. And at first, it doesn't seem like a big deal. But over time, those small adjustments become a pattern. And that pattern slowly pulls you away from who you're becoming. That's the real cost of staying where you no longer align. Not conflict, not discomfort, but compromise. And compromise, when it happens repeatedly, begins to reshape you. That's why removal is sometimes necessary. Not because the relationship is harmful in an obvious way, but because it's misaligned in a subtle one. And subtle misalignment can be more dangerous than obvious problems because you don't recognize it right away. You adapt to it. You normalize it. You learn how to function within it. Until one day, you realize you're no longer fully yourself. And that's what this process is preventing. Because when God removes something from your life, it's not always about what is happening now. It's about what could happen if it remained. It's about the direction it would take you, the version of you it would reinforce, the limitations it would quietly place on your growth. So instead of allowing that path to continue, something shifts. Not always dramatically, not always with explanation, but clearly enough for you to feel it. The connection becomes harder to maintain. The conversations lose depth. The alignment fades. And eventually distance forms. Not to punish you, but to protect you. And the challenge is, protection doesn't always feel comforting in the moment. Sometimes it feels like confusion. Sometimes it feels like loneliness. Sometimes it feels like you're losing something you didn't want to lose. But clarity often comes later. When you look back and realize that what was removed could not have supported where you are now. That if it had stayed, you would have stayed too. That your growth required space that the old connection could not provide. And that's when trust becomes important. Because you won't always understand the reason in real time. You won't always have closure. You won't always get a clear explanation. But you will feel the shift. And that feeling is enough. Enough to guide you. Enough to tell you that something is changing for a reason. Enough to remind you that not everything that leaves is meant to be held onto. So instead of resisting it, you begin to allow it. You stop trying to force what no longer flows. You stop trying to fix what no longer fits. You stop trying to maintain connections that require you to become less of yourself. And in that space, something new begins to form. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually. The right connections, the right alignment, the right environment for who you are becoming. Because when something is truly meant for you, it doesn't require you to shrink to keep it. One of the most difficult parts of this entire process is not recognizing misalignment. It's what you do once you see it clearly. Because awareness creates responsibility. And the moment you realize that certain relationships no longer align, you're faced with a quiet but powerful decision. Do you keep showing up the same way, or do you begin to change your level of access? This is where guilt starts to surface. You begin questioning yourself in ways that feel uncomfortable. You wonder if you're being too distant, too selective, too different. You ask yourself if you're abandoning people, or if you're becoming someone who is harder to connect with. And the reason this feels so heavy is because a part of you still cares. There is history there is familiarity, there are shared experiences that don't just disappear because your alignment has changed. But this is where your understanding has to mature. Love does not require unlimited access. You can care about someone and still recognize that their level of access to your life needs to shift. You can value a relationship and still acknowledge that the way it functioned before no longer works for who you are becoming. Because boundaries are not about removing people entirely. They are about defining how you engage. Right now, if you feel guilty for pulling back, it's likely because you've been conditioned to believe that maintaining connection is always the highest priority. That keeping relationships intact, no matter the cost, is a sign of loyalty or maturity. But what often gets ignored is the internal cost of that approach. When you continue showing up in spaces that no longer align, you begin to overextend yourself. You say yes when your internal response is no. You give energy when you already feel drained. You stay present externally while disconnecting internally. And over time, that creates tension within you. Not because others are necessarily doing something wrong, but because you are no longer honoring what you already know to be true. So instead of thinking of boundaries as something harsh or extreme, begin to see them as adjustments. You are not cutting people off. You are recalibrating how you show up. Some people no longer have the same access to your time. Some no longer have the same access to your thoughts, your emotions, or your inner process. And that shift is not a rejection, it is alignment. This also means you don't have to explain everything. You don't have to justify every change. You don't have to make your internal clarity understandable to everyone around you. Because boundaries are not built through explanation. They are built through consistency, through how you choose to respond, what you choose to engage with, and what you quietly step back from. At first, this may feel uncomfortable. People may notice the difference. Some may question it, some may misunderstand it, and some may even interpret it as distance or disconnection. But that reaction does not mean you are doing something wrong. It simply means the dynamic is changing, and not everyone is used to that change. And this is where you have to stay grounded in your decision. Because if a relationship requires you to override your clarity just to maintain it, then it is already misaligned. Healthy relationships do not require you to shrink your growth. They do not depend on you staying the same version of yourself forever. They create space for evolution, not resistance to it. So instead of choosing obligation, you begin choosing alignment. You begin trusting that the relationships meant to remain will adjust naturally. They will not require constant explanation, and they will not make you feel like your growth is a problem to be managed. And for the relationships that cannot adjust, distance will happen on its own. Not through conflict, not through force, but through truth being lived consistently. And that truth does not need to be announced loudly. It simply needs to be honored quietly. One of the clearest ways to know this process is real is how it feels over time. Not in one moment, not in a sudden decision, but in consistent, quiet shifts that you can't ignore anymore. The first sign is emotional. You start to feel more at peace with less. Less interaction, less noise, less constant connection. And instead of feeling empty, it feels lighter. You're not as pulled to maintain every relationship. You're not as affected by distance. In fact, some of that distance begins to feel necessary, even relieving. And that can feel strange at first, because you're used to equating closeness with connection. But now, you're realizing that proximity does not always mean alignment. And sometimes, space creates more clarity than closeness ever did. The second sign shows up in your behavior. You feel less need to explain yourself. You're not constantly trying to justify your decisions, your boundaries, or your direction. You don't feel the same pressure to make everyone understand you. Not because you don't care, but because you're no longer depending on that understanding to stay grounded in your choices. That's a shift. Because before, you may have over-explained just to maintain peace. Now, you choose clarity over comfort. The third sign is how separation happens. It becomes natural. You're not forcing distance. You're not creating conflict. You're not making dramatic exits. Things just change. Conversations become less frequent. Interactions become shorter. The connection gradually fades without tension. And even though part of you notices it, another part of you understands it. You're not trying to stop it anymore, because you recognize that it's happening for a reason. And finally, there's clarity. You begin to see people differently, not with judgment, but with awareness. You can feel who aligns with your current direction and who doesn't. You can sense where you can be fully yourself and where you have to hold back. And that awareness becomes your guide. You're no longer trying to keep everyone in your life at the same level. You're allowing your circle to reflect your alignment. And that changes everything. At the end of this entire process, something becomes very clear, even if it didn't make sense at the beginning. You are not losing people, you are losing misalignment. And that distinction matters more than you think, because loss feels like something valuable is being taken from you, while alignment reveals that what is leaving could not fully support where you are going. What remains, however, is different. What remains does not require you to shrink, adjust constantly, or silence parts of yourself just to maintain the connection. It does not depend on you staying the same version of yourself forever. It moves with you, grows with you, and allows you to be fully present without feeling like you have to manage how much of yourself is acceptable. That's how you know it's real. And this is why the process often feels quiet instead of dramatic. There are no clear endings, no major confrontations, no obvious moments where everything changes at once. Instead, there is a gradual refinement. Some connections fade, others shift, and a few remain, but the ones that remain feel different. They feel lighter, clearer, more stable. Yes, there may be moments where it feels lonely, especially when your circle becomes smaller. But that loneliness is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is being recalibrated. Because familiarity can feel comfortable even when it's no longer aligned, and letting go of that familiarity takes trust. So instead of holding on to what used to feel right, you begin to honor what feels right now. You allow your relationships to reflect your growth, not resist it. You choose alignment over obligation, clarity over comfort, and truth over attachment. And in doing that, you create space for something more solid, more honest, and more sustainable. So trust the process, even when it feels quiet. Protect your peace without guilt. Honor the boundaries you've learned to set. Because what is truly meant for you will not require you to lose yourself to keep it. It will meet you where you are aligned, and it will remain without force.